Good morning, everybody. I welcome you very warmly, and I hope that today's discussion will be very fruitful and that results of our roundtable debate will be useful in the European Union as a voice in consultation of the future of the electronic communication sector and its infrastructure, what is important to achieve the objectives of the digital decade and digital decade policy program. I want to start with my personal sentimental memory. When in 2012, 2013, I have been a minister of digitalization in Poland, we have initiated the work on a very unique Digital Poland operational program related to the European financial framework for 2014 and 2020. Obviously, the development of network accessibility of the growing 4G network was one of the key issues. And I remember discussions with colleagues from telco sector, big and small companies in Poland, how to make network at the rural areas much more accessible. The representatives of telco sector emphasized that the economic efficiency of those investments, also combination of public and private money, depends on the scale of traffic done by users living as residents on rural areas. It was unquestionable, and we have discussed how to develop various kinds of services addressed to them, to people living at rural areas. When I'm looking at the current debate about so-called fair share, I see in some aspects completely different view presented by telco companies. And it comes from changed market model and the new objectives which are coming from new concepts, how to find the supportive sources for the future investments, indicating the big techs and their fees as a possible partners and sources to finance future development. But, and it is the purpose of this roundtable today, there are some controversies and conflicted interests, and we have to debate and look for compromises. When I'm looking again, for example, at the Axon report, Europe's internet ecosystem, socioeconomic benefits of a fairer balance between tech giants and telecom operators from May 2022, and compare evidence and arguments from the report by Epicenter Works and EDRI, net neutrality, myths from telecom industry and responses from civil society, I see the big difference not only in the dimension how the problem is presented, but also what kind of data and evidence may strengthen the opinion. So it means that we have to discuss all problems and meet representatives of all partners to take into account some key problems. What is the real purpose of this solution? Oblige large tech companies to pay a fee to telecom companies for their confirmed or continued operation of broadband to end users. What kind of unintended consequences, disadvantages it may bring to all actors of the value chain, small and medium enterprises, taxpayers, and users, consumers in many areas, for instance, schools and educational institutions starting to use e-learning instruments much more commonly, especially after COVID experience. What kind of impact this solution may bring to the development of the accessibility of new technological services? How this fair share model can be supportive to achieve the goals of digital decade due to the European Commission In addition, the European Commission is considering what kind of rules, if legislative, I'm not sure, is needed to support the new communication challenges. The crucial goals of the potential proposal are, first, technological and market developments, impacts on future networks and business models for electronic communication and improvements of this development. Second, the increasing fairness for consumers, which way it can be achieved in this kind of model with the idea of fair share. Thirdly, overcoming barriers to the single market, how to make it. Fourth, building and ensuring a level playing field for the wider ecosystem using the rule of fair contribution by all digital players. Finally, I think what we want to achieve during our discussion is related to debate and also to try to find some solutions and compromises. So let's start. We have invited excellent participants, and we will start with opening remarks done by Michel Jager, Secretary General of Taxpayers Association of Europe, Vice President of German Taxpayers. The floor is yours, Michel, please.
Thank you very much, Michael, but you took over almost all my points, what I wanted to say. That makes it not very, very easy for me, but I think what you pointed out is one-to-one, 100% what we with the taxpayers movement with small and medium entrepreneurs network see. So for sure we need a joint solution. For sure we need a better digital infrastructure, digitalization. We have new challenges. The question for us is regulatory impact assessment. So how should it be done? Which costs? So if for instance the big players, Google, Amazon, and others, would have to pay for this infrastructure, will they become owners, or is it how it will be regulated? How consumers have to pay for it? Is everybody who is later on providing digital services has an impact by higher costs? So the consumer has to pay finally, and then for us, what is also the question, if it will be a barrier for startups, if these hurdles will be too high. So for us, it's very interesting to listen to the experts and to find the right decision and proposal, how we can ensure that we have this digital infrastructure working, because we need it in each country, but to minimize costs to consumers and to boost economy. I think that's for us the most important topic, and we fear that it could lead also to higher regulation, and we are in favor of free market economy for sure with rules, but we fear that we start now with a good idea, but finally it could be over-regulation, what would not be an advantage to growth for startups and to consumers. I want to end with this because I want to listen to the experts, and thank you very much for this excellent panel and for this brilliant discussion. It's high time to discuss it, and it's the right time to discuss it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michel. And I think what we need to consider during our discussion, it is the idea not to over-regulate. Yes, I fully agree. This is very, very important. Now I want to give the screen to Ivan Stefanec, member of the European Parliament, active in IMCO and ITRE committees, president of SME Europe of the EPP, and also SME Connect board member. Ivan, the screen is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Michal. Good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot for relation to this very, very topical debate. I can confirm that this topic is widely discussed in the European Parliament. from position of SMEs, which also we represent, we try to help, is very important, the stability of the environment. Of course, SMEs, as this was mentioned by yourself and as well as by Michael Jager, we need predictable, stable environment, which is not influenced by so many regulations, so many taxations. At the same time, we need to improve infrastructure, which is critical of future of SMEs and future of our economy. So let me highlight also that in line with European policy of digitalization and the implementation of AI, really we need to ensure the availability of high-speed internet connection for the people and also companies across the Europe. So EU asks for a fixed gigabit connection in every household until 2030. But widely available high-speed internet requires really significant investments to infrastructure, because performant fiber networks are the basis for a connect. The most controversial part really is a questionnaire to inform the so-called fair share initiative that might make the largest traffic generators contribute to IT infrastructure. These days, a group of 5 companies are responsible for roughly 50% of the global internet traffic and generate disproportionate network cost. So the giants invest in their own products and services, not in access networks. In 2021, these companies invested around 1 billion euro in infrastructure such as large international and undersea routes, peering, transit, and caching. But in the same period, Europe's total telecom investments reached 56.3 billion euro per year. So fair balance and burden sharing is essential for the success of digital transition, I believe. European entrepreneurs and consumers are exposed to the highest inflation rates since the common currency euro was established, as we know nowadays. So situation is even worse in some Central Eastern European countries which kept their national currencies. We are now talking about more than 25% of inflation. The split of network costs can relieve the pressure on consumer prices for communication services as the only way to meet investment needs for the transition to 5G. Big telecommunication companies are demanding that big tech companies contribute to the cost of network deployment, but also regional decentralized networks of alternative network operators play crucial role for the resilience of networks and cybersecurity. And the deployment of these networks, however, requires high investments of the network operators. So politically sensitive question is where to set the threshold that would qualify a tech company as a large traffic generator, category likely to include the likes of Netflix and Google. Another big question is the type of solution. Questionnaire proposes 2 options: digital fund that could be established at the EU or national level, and the direct contribution to the telecom operators that might come with some strings attached, such as green investments. All companies deploying fiber should be recipients of the fair contribution instead of negotiated solutions that would lead for an imbalanced market and disadvantages for alternative network operators, because their negotiating position is weakened in comparison with big telecommunication companies. It is necessary also to find a solution that makes sure all companies that invest in fiber networks are involved equally and proportionally. So it is essential that distortion of competition in the telecommunication market must be avoided. Last point, I'd like to mention that we dealt with this issue also in the file named Digital Decade for 2030, and there was the compromise, which I can also highlight. So it is written there that all market actors benefiting from the digital transformation assume their social responsibilities and contribute to a competitive and functioning environment for public goods, services, and infrastructure for the benefit of all citizens in Europe. So at least it was the first playground, or the attempt for playground for next discussion about this important topic of fair share. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ivana. I think it was very, very inspiring, and you have presented also the view from the European Parliament. And also thank you very much for some additional remarks on the situation, different situation in many countries, in some countries, especially in the Central Eastern Europe, where the inflation is very high. So we need to be very cautious thinking about the solution and adjust the solution to the real conditions and real environment. Thank you very much again. And now we are moving to the panel. We have excellent, great panelists during our discussion. And we want to start with Nina Cummins, Head of Communication and Access from Meta. So one of the big players is starting our debate. Nina, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for organising the event today and for really trying to urge to have an open, transparent debate and to collect sides from all sectors of the community. We've often heard this being positioned very much as big tech and big telco, but as you rightfully have organised the event today, it includes everyone in Europe, SMEs, consumers, and we really need to think very carefully about what the implications of any proposals here could be. I think what struck me is that we have been hearing over the last year an awful lot of different solutions being put on the table, but without really digging into understanding what is the problem statement itself. And you touched on this, Dr. Bunny, at the start, when you were saying, you know, we need to look very carefully about what is it that we're trying to solve here? Is it issues around regulation? Is it issues around market consolidation, spectrum prices, or something else? I think it's very concerning if we jump straight to a solution without really having established the problem. So I very much welcome the European Commission exploratory questionnaire to try and get to the bottom of this. What I would say is also around just a couple of points about who is generating traffic here. And I appreciate that often in the debate, it's very much seen as a handful of large, predominantly US tech companies who are driving traffic here. If I could just direct back to BEREC's preliminary assessment last year, which is quite clear in looking at the fact that it's the users who are demanding and calling for data for various innovative content. And this content is actually also positive for telcos in terms of driving users to want to buy more broadband subscriptions or higher serviced broadband subscriptions. So data growth, I think, is not a bad thing. And indeed, we see this often reported in telcos' own financial statements and also in terms of attracting more investment. Only just yesterday, UniSuper in Australia, a fund, announced a 5% stake in Vodafone's tower company, Vantage Towers. And one of the reasons they gave was the strong, significant growth in the demand for data, which will drive more broadband subscriptions. Also, just to flag here in terms of fibre rollout, we commissioned a report with Analysis Mason that was published last week on May the 3rd, which looked at the state of full fibre networks in Europe, a state of play and future evolution. And again, I'd invite panelists and those dialing in to consider that report. It sets out the road in terms of how full fibre is developed to date, with particularly high rates, obviously, in countries like Spain, France, and Portugal. Admittedly, there are some gaps, but this comes back to existing gaps, and it's something that we have to look at as to how we solve those rural gaps, whether that's through existing universal service funds or through other forms of tax, rather than jumping simply to ask one sector of the community to fund another part of the community as well. And just to explain as well that telcos do invest, and it's right that they invest significant amounts. I know we heard figures in terms of how much they invest in infrastructure, but US tech companies, we do invest too. If you compare those figures like for like, it's not surprising that those figures are not directly comparable, because that's not our job. We're not in the business of selling wholesale broadband access. What we are doing is investing billions in the apps and services that drives demand for those services. And other commentators in the market, including Plum Consulting, have looked at this and have, as well as BEREC, and have realized that for every piece of revenue that we spend in content, that is actually adding to the bottom line and revenue for telcos in terms of being able to sell their services. So yes, we do invest huge amounts in subsea cables and CDNs and caches. And by doing so, we bring over 80% plus of our traffic that users are calling for, if we want to phrase it that way, closer to the users. And that results in over 5 billion euros worth of savings to the bottom line for telcos and having to deliver that traffic. And just to explain that we often hear in the context here a lot of concerns about, well, what will happen in the future? What about metaverse? And I know that the European Commission recently did a call for evidence around virtual worlds or the metaverse. Again, I would invite people to look back at a blog which we published on the 23rd of March. It's available on our Meta website under FB Engineering, and it explains that metaverse will not result in this sudden explosion of data traffic for the foreseeable future. And we're talking really here probably around at least 5 to 8 years, maybe a little bit longer. Metaverse in terms of virtual reality will be rolled out over fixed Wi-Fi networks, which are largely already in place and can handle significant data growth as well. And therefore, there is not going to be this concern of an explosion or huge investment needed in 5G. 5G will come, but that's much more down the future. And Ericsson itself has released a study showing that telcos will invest in 5G. It makes good business sense because it saves them 54% total cost of ownership. And very finally, I just wanted to touch on some of the points you made in the opening statements around the risk for consumers and SMEs. And while I'm not best placed at Meta to comment on these, and I'm sure other panelists will, I do think it's very interesting that it's not just the likes of tech companies that are raising concerns here, but as you mentioned, Epicenter, Bayuk, other consultants like Oxera for the Dutch Ministry of Economics, and most recently the Danish released a non-paper highlighting concerns for consumers, for the cloud industry, but also the creative industry as well, about potential risks in prices. And I think, as we stand now at a pinnacle point in terms of achievement of digital decade targets, we should be very careful about introducing any form of proposals or regulation, as you said, which could detract from achieving those targets, including that 75% of companies use cloud and AI and big data and are able to grow within Europe. So with that, I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I will hand back to you and to the next panelists.
Thank you very much, Nina. And I think it is also very important in our discussion. You have mentioned the BEREC report. I think it's very important to remember about users' demands, yes, because it's crucial for the market, yes. The market exists if there is a move, yes, and there is the traffic. So I think we need to take into account also those issues. And thank you very much for your information about the future solutions, for example, related to metaverse development. I think we need to consider also thinking about principles, rules, probably legislation. I don't know, I'm not sure. We need to take into account future technologies also and new involvement of users. Thank you very much again. And now we are going forward, and I think that we will have the different view now. So I want to invite Dr. Jakob Greiner, Vice President, European Affairs at Deutsche Telekom. Jakob, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Michal Boni. Thank you, everybody here, to inviting me to be at the screen and to share our views. Let me say the views that are not only Deutsche Telekoms, but I think largely as the sector. And let me start with why we are debating this topic today. I read with interest the description of today's event, and it says large telcos have been calling for a discussion on this topic. That's true. I would insofar say extend it also to smaller telcos. We will have one of them today also at the panel. But also, and Ivan Stefanik said it is the European legislator, Parliament and Council that have called for this debate. And they have called so very, very directly, both in the digital direction, the digital declaration by the three institutions, but also in the work program for the Digital Decade 2030, that all who benefit from digital transformation should fairly contribute to the costs of telecommunications infrastructure. And so I'm very comfortable in this debate that it's not only the large telcos, and now the Commission is doing exactly that, exploring whether those adequate frameworks that the legislator has called for should be proposed, following, and there I think this whole panel fundamentally agrees, following a very thorough fact-finding mission that has started now with this exploratory consultation, where all the details that we are now debating since probably 1.5 years. Are there network costs on our networks? Is there a data traffic increase? Meta says no, others say yes. How does one sector or the other contribute? All of these things are now put on the table in this consultation. And for that, we think we are already one step further in debate, which is good. This exercise is also part of a set of actions that the Commission has proposed to make gigabit connectivity available to all citizens and to all businesses, including, obviously, SMEs across the EU by 2030. Again, this is set out by the European legislator, an ambitious aim that will come even with KPIs for the next couple of years set out by the Commission to say, are we on track to reach the EU connectivity targets in 7 years? And that is gigabits in every household, 5G in all connected areas. And we are surely absolutely committed to this aim. It's in our own interest. But we also have to acknowledge that the telecom sector finds itself right now in a surely challenging environment. I like to describe that on those panels that I sit recently, rather than being a sick patient, but at the same time, we have the expectation to become Superman in 7 years and to deliver those targets. Why should this be of concern for SMEs? Because this is why we're debating today. Because telecoms are the basis of innovation that, like Nina said, runs over our network. We are the basis of digital transformation, and we are the engine that needs to keep running, and that also needs to evolve with the requirements set out by innovation that comes in the future. Connectivity, and here I'm quoting not myself, connectivity is a critical enabler of the metaverse, but today's networks will not meet its needs without radical change. And since Analysis Mason has already been quoted by Nina, I'd like to quote them again. This is a report, an independent report that just came out 1 or 2 months ago, I believe. And we couldn't agree more with this analysis. When we talk about fully immersive virtual worlds, cloud processing, unlimited number of users, companies who rely on the industrial metaverse, a bit like the debate on digital twins, if you recall, then networks of tomorrow will be built different than networks of today. And they will be different. They will need a higher bandwidth, they need much lower latency, they will need to be more resilient, more secure. This was already discussed in the beginning of this debate. And we need to guarantee that the continued capacity that is there needs to be shouldered. The traffic increases that we estimate, and you will see this when the consultation results will come out. At least in our network, we have a clear prediction that network traffic will increase 20 to 30% each year, year after year in the future. And this bears costs on our networks that we need to shoulder. Also, this question will be very, very detailed answered and asked for in this consultation. And just to very quickly respond to Nina, who said, well, you know, whatever happens with the metaverse happens in, I don't know, 7 years and beyond. And for now, networks have the capacity to shoulder the traffic. Yes, I fully agree with you. That's the issue. We are doing our due diligence. We are planning our networks long-term, as you know, and we are planning these networks with an increase in the capacity of 20 to 30%. Does it mean that that doesn't imply costs? And does it mean that we shouldn't have a debate who should bear these costs? I think yes, we need to have this debate. So this is a transformation that my sector has to undergo right now. At the same time, the sector's return on capital is almost enough to cover the cost of capital. End user prices, and we will surely talk about prices in the next couple of minutes, have been going down in the telecom sector for the past 10 years. Right now, they're stagnating. And so in other words, some telcos in Europe are not profitable. They make a loss. And again, the expectation is to reach these targets until 2030. And to get there, and this is again a number that I have not come out with some of those consultants that are right now making a good business since 8 months in this debate, but it's the European Commission that outlines in its consultation that we are now facing an investment gap of 174 billion euros. 174 billion. Right now, with the speed that we are deploying networks in Europe, until in 7 years, this gap needs to be closed. So the question, in my view, is very fair, and that's why we're debating it since 1.5 years. Who should jump in to bear these additional investments? Is it the telcos who I just described to you? I'm at the moment not the best positioned to fill this gap. Is it the user? Should end user prices be raised, as some of the content and application providers have suggested in the past? Just raise your prices, why do you come to us? Or should it, in line with what the European legislator has asked for, a more fair redistribution of who is going to participate in the investments for the connectivity infrastructure? In our view, the benefit, and I think it's absolutely right, we need to debate. In the end, it's all about the end user, it's about the business. Is there a benefit? Is there a risk? We believe there are benefits. Why? Because to ensure that SMEs are able to enjoy high quality networks that are equipped to support the innovation that is rightfully and hopefully continue to come on this infrastructure, and by placing this investment on more shoulders than just on one shoulder today, which is the end user. I would leave it with this. I would just maybe very quickly as a last point also refer to what Michael said. He said, we are a fan of the free market. I fully agree with you, we as well. And you can surely believe me, I would like to have a bit of less regulation on the telecom sector. Hopefully we're getting there at some point. But regulation is there needed when you do not anymore get to a solution in the market itself. And I know this is highly debated, but for us, the starting point is the interconnection market. That's why we came with this debate, because if we were to achieve today payments by those large traffic generators, as the Commission lays it out in consultation, we wouldn't have the debate today. And please, let's not ignore that. This is nothing new. Payments are being made today to large and also less large operators. Payments coming from companies such as Meta. The only problem is that these companies do not accept anymore that they want to pay telecom operators for the service that we give to them. That is transporting the data from A to B. And this is my last sentence that I want to make. I think Nina referred to the 80% of traffic that is basically brought to the end user. I already heard 99% in the past, not from you, but from others. I try to picture that with something that you all can relate to. You order a fridge and you pay the company to deliver the fridge in front of the door or even behind the door, but you still need to carry that fridge down to the basement. These are the costs that we have when we're transporting this network to the end, this traffic to the end user. And I believe here we will have a thorough discussion once again when the Commission has come out with results. Let me reiterate again, I fully agree we need a fact-based discussion. There has been too many studies left and right, and indeed, like Nina said, this is all boiling down to telcos against large content providers. I think this is not wise and this is not clever to continue like this. This is ultimately in the end how to reach those digital targets. And we need to now have or continue a thorough discussion on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jakob. It was a very strong message, and I think it is important to understand this message. If I properly understood, it means that digital transformation requires network transformation in the long perspective. So it means that we need to discuss about network of tomorrow. And when we are discussing about network of tomorrow, we need to consider all aspects, yes, and the problem of those gaps, yes, and how to finance those gaps is very important, and fully agree. And I hope that our discussion is based on facts, not only on opinions and interest of companies and sectors. So I hope that the results of this roundtable will be very fruitful. And now we will move to Tom Smith, CEO Wireless Connect. Tom, the screen is yours, please.
Sorry, I'd just like to say thank you to SME Connect for organising this event, Dr. Heitz and the team. It is much appreciated by me as an SME provider. And I would also like to, also just thank the panelists for joining as well. It's really appreciated. For me, slideshow. I hope everyone can see the slides. So is it a solution looking for a problem, these network fees? And I'm going to be speaking, I suppose, trying to take a holistic view, not just my own commercial interest, although I do think there is a significant commercial interest that has to be looked at, but also the impact of society and what is my job as an SME ISP and how do I serve society in my work. We were founded in 2006. We're a small company. We're by no means unique. You know, there's about 50 companies like us in Ireland. There's at least 250 ISPs similar to us in Italy. And I suppose we were providers that formed a market in the gap in the market, where the larger telecoms companies, for whatever reason, the constraints of their size and not being able to nimbly move and I suppose take on and invest in their infrastructure early on in the noughties and 90s, that we actually filled out a need predominantly for serving communities in rural areas, which may have not been as profitable for the big players to put in. But just to give you an idea, when we started, we just sold 1 megabit, and we sold that 10 times, then we bought 2 megabits and so on and so forth. So and we have scaled up accordingly. So you can see there the passage from 1 megabits access speeds to 30 to 50 to 100 and 250 megabits now on fixed wireless. And of course, we then use obviously the wholesale telecoms providers for fiber to the home access as well, and of course for backhaul. If I was to summarize the network fees pros and cons, I have tried to find a pro for the network fees issue. I'm all for digital transition. I do support the EU initiatives on connecting the unconnected and improving connectivity, particularly in rural areas. That is absolutely crucial, and I appreciate the minister's comments earlier and indeed the MEP's comments about that. And I suppose for me, that was our mission statement, was to serve those communities and serve the SMEs in those communities and consumers. If I was to list the cons, I'd start by saying I'm worried about the distortion of the internet access market. So however the fees will happen, or if it's a levy or a tax and then it's redistributed, there will be inevitable distortion of the internet access market. I'm also concerned while it's not in my companies, but it's an observation, a technical observation I would make, is that it's quite easy with the current internet, and we'll see it in the slides later, that it's quite easy for small to medium content or cloud or hosting or application providers to actually target a local area and join a local internet exchange. And a local internet exchange is almost like a point where a load of ISPs can meet and exchange traffic, and content providers can meet and exchange traffic with those ISPs. And it has been one of the most positive developments for us as an ISP was to join and harness the ISPs. And we have a little party usually when we see a new content provider joining that, because it allows us to build out our infrastructure to that point, and then take that data and give it to the users should they request it. If they don't request it, it doesn't get used, that's fine. But if they request it, we can build out our infrastructure in an efficient manner to do that. We're worried about the net neutrality, paid versus unpaid peering. Like if you're like, I understand that some people do pay for access and all that for whatever reason. But what I'm trying to understand, and which is I've never quite got my head around, is how can you have network neutrality, but yet then you'll have parties paying money for no advantage on accessing the customer. And so what I'd be concerned about is if they went through, the larger content providers would actually have an advantage over SME content providers because they'd have better access. And that, or else what are they paying for? Or, you know, so we gotta think about that. I'm also worried about disadvantage in SME ISPs. That's a selfish concern I have, but it's one that nonetheless I have to keep an eye on. And I'm also concerned about the privacy of consumers and privacy of EU members, national infrastructure, member states, the government information flows and stuff. If we deter people from peering locally and exchanging traffic locally, it is a likely and it's a high risk, and this is what's happened in the Korean case, where the traffic will move offshore to third countries where it can be. And because of the global nature of the internet, it's very hard to see how that can be prevented with the introduction of fees, and it's something I am very worried about. And we see in the practical example in the South Korean case where they introduced fees, there was this unwanted, unintended consequence. There's also the issue, obviously, is that when it's moved to third countries, there's a much more scope for foreign intelligence services to gather information about EU citizens and obviously EU member states government data too. We're also, by doing that, by pushing that data offshore and not actually encouraging people to peer locally, peer often, and exchange traffic at a local level, what we would actually see is an increase in distance between the application and the customer, and that would be very worrying. And it also would reduce the reliability of services. The reason why I would say that is that when you actually have an exchange traffic locally, your network becomes much more resilient to denial of service attacks from external countries, which, as we know, the political landscape, that is an ever increasing threat, and it's something that we all need to be mindful of. And so this will be an unintended consequence of basically discouraging people to peer in the EU and peer locally. There's also an issue of compounding fees, and I'll discuss that later, but particularly it'll probably be more illuminated as we see kind of maps of the internet. But on average, it takes network traffic will travel across at least 3 entities on the internet, roughly speaking. So 3 network providers, and are they all to have a little piece of the action along the way? And if you look at take into account the interconnectivity of the internet, the actual, and you were to introduce a levy or a tax at that level, that would be absolutely detrimental, and it would actually, this costs to the consumer would spiral out of control, and that's a concern I'd have. If you look at what we've done, we're an organic investment model, you know, buy for $1, sell for $2, as they used to say in The Wire, although the margins would be less than that in the image. So what do I do as an ISP? Well, I connect my customers to entities that the customer chooses to interact with, and I connect my customer to the internet. But it's not a monologue, it's a conversation. So customers are requesting a page for a website or an application on their device. The content application provider responds to the request, and then the networks like myself carries the data to the customer. That's my job. That's what my customer pays me for, is to carry that data. So in ways, my job is also to connect the internet to my customer. If we look at the development of internet access technology, like we started off by selling 1 megabit back in 2006, now we're 100 to 250 megs on a fixed wireless connection. So even though our bandwidth capabilities have gone up by 100 to 250x in that time frame, the cost of the equipment hasn't really changed. It's been static. And if we look at, let's say, Cambium networks, the equipment, you can actually see the range of speeds available there that we use. And we actually see also the distance at which we're able to do that. And that's because of the work that we've done with our partners and our suppliers. If we look here, just to give you an anecdote, 1 megabit back in 2006, I'm now able to purchase 10 gigabits for that same price that we paid back in 2006. So even though the bandwidth, so when people say bandwidth growth, it is a good thing. It drives demand. And that's something that we need to be, I suppose, be mindful of, is that there's a 10,000x efficiency gain there in my case. There was a couple of reasons for that, scale and purchasing power. Obviously, I was tiny back in 2006, but also just step changes in technology, when you go to 100 megabits, gigabits, 10 gigabits, and of course 100 gigabits now. Each one of those step changes also achieves an economy of scale and an economy of scope. And that's really important to understand. And if you were looking at innovations also in the chips, network chips and stuff like that, and that's why the EU Chips Act is incredibly important to us. And in fact, they're the type of initiatives that I want to support the EU in doing, because it actually, from a level field perspective, it really helps all ISPs and all content providers is to get those chips manufactured locally or on friendly shores, and to have a sustainable and reliable supply chain. Just on the note of scalability and data growth, if we look at this, is just a picture of the internet it's a revisualization of the internet back in 1997. And then you can actually go to that website and you see a nice time lapse of it, and you see the growth and demise of internet companies, and you see obviously the growth. But this is when the internet back in 2006 when we started, and this is the internet back in 2022. And unfortunately, the resolution of this screen won't actually give it justice, but just to zoom in on that particular square box that you see there, and each one of those is a network connecting with other networks. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. And so what I'm saying there is that some people say that the model of financing the internet growth is broken, but there's a lot of companies entering in. Each one of those is a new company joining the internet and exchanging traffic on the internet, and it's a great thing. And it's something that I'm delighted to be part of, and I love being a part of. So the levy, or a cost added to each interconnection, that's a compound problem that I don't think people are talking about enough. With the scale of internet interconnectivity, I think that could be a huge problem for the consumer, who would ultimately have to pay for all this. They would be paying through it indirectly, and it's just, and just to point out, here's an example of just my own ISP here, my AS62629. That's the number of the serial number of my ISP. And then I have my 2 big upstream carriers. And then you can see, and then obviously we connect with our local internet exchange. The local internet exchange ecosystem is a phenomenal development, and it was a technical solution to a technical problem. And there's so many exchanges across Europe now. There's DKIX, you have LUNAP, Link, you have INEX in Ireland. And what's brilliant about that is it allows small companies to get together and exchange traffic with the bigger content providers and with other ISPs. And so it reduces our costs. So to give you an idea, on INEX in Ireland, which is appearing, which is done mainly settlement free, so no money exchanges hands, 60 to 70% of our traffic goes through that, at about 35% of the cost of internet transit. So internet transit is like your internet connection to other third-party networks, while the exchange is just where people locally can exchange, and you see the larger content providers are all there and exchanging traffic. So think about that, 60 to 70% of the traffic. And we would be very worried about anything that would disrupt people's tendency to peer or tendency to come and invest locally to peer. So the other main benefit of it is from a security perspective, in that it's the availability for the consumer and the availability to the actual proximity between the customer and the data, so that their applications are more responsive. So for online games, but also for augmented reality and those type of stuff, the low latency is absolutely key. Some ISPs who don't or who are complaining about costs of their infrastructure don't harness these technical solutions to the technical problem. And we'd invite them to do so. And I think it's an important point to make. The other thing is that a lot of these ISPs were founded with public money, and they've already built their infrastructure. And an example, as an ISP, for someone who's built their own network, the first megabit is the hardest to deliver. So once you put that fiber between two towers, you've actually, most of the cost was in the civil construction. And so now you have a fiber pair between the two towers. But now there's also technology such as DWDM, and for the want of a better word, the best way of describing it is, instead of sending one light signal across a fiber pair, you can send a rainbow of light signals, and each one of them can increase the capacity either by 10 gig, 1 gig, or 100 gig, each one of them. So and also according to the state aid guidelines, even the updated ones as well are quite descriptive about it, where they say that upgrades of active components don't constitute, they constitute a marginal investment, and so they wouldn't qualify for state aid, so that they should be, so that's another point just to raise in that. There's also the conflict of interest, and I just want to talk about it because it's a bit of an elephant in the room, is that if you're charging a customer to connect them to the internet, and then you're trying to charge the internet or entities on the internet to connect to the customer, there is a potential for a conflict of interest where the customer is basically being told that you have a really high quality internet connection, but the reality is that they can introduce a commercial consideration that actually may lead to suboptimal routing or traffic going the long way around. And that's something that possibly needs to be looked at as part of this debate. So if the consumer pays for access to other parties, you can't have it both ways, or that would be our perspective on it. We would say that consumer ISP choice should be wide and transparent. So if there's a cost associated with giving someone internet access, I think the customer should bear that cost, and it should be transparent. And that would allow the customer to value what connection they have and differentiate transparently, and not have an indirect subsidy to certain parties which may not be available to other parties. And that is a key issue that I'm very concerned about. What can the Commission do? Well, I think they can follow best practices with REFIT, the regulatory the toolbox. I think that's an absolute key point, that they follow the best practices on any measure that they consider implementing. And if they're not, then the question has to be asked, why would they follow their own best practices? That should be a concern. And focus on policy measures that crowds in investments. So policy measures. So allocate the entire upper 6 gigahertz band for license exempt, just like in the United States. That'll improve bandwidth for ISPs so that people in their Wi-Fi in their homes can have better connections with the internet. And it also allows for SMEs like me to invest in rural areas and increase bandwidth there as well. It gives us the tools to fix the problem, to address the digital divide. Encourage member states to reserve some spectrum for light licenses and local scoped licenses, as opposed to just huge national auctions. And ensure SME investments are recognised with due state aid mapping for 2023 broadband guidelines. And I am pleased with the quite good comprehensive review that the Commission have taken on the broadband guidelines over the last few years, and it's just been recently adopted in February. And implement the CHIPS Act to ensure that ISPs and cloud providers chain is stable, reliable, and hopefully reduce costs for all of our equipment, and allow those people who are delivering the most to benefit the most in a fair manner. And with that, I will leave that. I've had the floor back to you, and I hope you enjoyed that talk.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think it was very, very inspiring and comprehensive, and I think that it is a very good background for discussion. Also with your recommendation, what can the Commission do? I think it's important for our further discussion. And also you have mentioned how important is the realistic impact assessment. Yes, and I think that we need to take into account all your analysis, facts, figures, and recommendations. Thank you very much again. And now we move to Lisa Di Feliciantonio, Chief External Relations and Sustainability Officer at FastWeb. Lisa, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody for organizing this very interesting debate about, something that I think it's really, we're really at a kind of a turning point in the industry on this. Let me start by saying that to be very straightforward message. This is not, I'm a challenger. Used to be known in Europe as a challenger operator. So somebody that, was kind of fighting to have, a good level of competition. I personally fought for net neutrality rules, and I've always been very, very on the same let's say on the same level and on the same very, very much in synchrony with all the people that were defending the internet as we know it. Nevertheless, on this specific topic, I'm afraid that I have a kind of bit of a different ideas and messages from what we heard so far, especially from Nina and Tom. On one thing, I do agree. This is an ecosystem. We do need each other. We do need each other. Although when I hear, you need our content. Our content is what drives adoption, what drives your revenues. I'm afraid that the economic reality is not that. Let's look 1 second at the Italian market. The Italian market is a shrinking market. We are losing wireline lines every year. We've lost 600,000 wireline lines. People, basically do not feel, most families, a lot of families increasingly don't feel the need to have an internet connection because, for instance, mobile is very performing or for other reasons. On top of that, prices are constantly decreasing. I was the one fighting for a good level of competition. We have such a good level of competition. I'm very glad for the consumer and for FastWeb that as a business because of all the regulatory framework that was set up by the Commission over this year. But let's face it, this has also other aspects. The aspect is that the consumer is ruling. Consumer is not paying in Italy and in many other countries, I suspect, no premium price for upgrading to, for instance, fiber to the home or more performing network. So on one hand, we see data increasing and the need to upgrade networks and provide the consumer more and more performing network. On the other hand, we are not simply extracting any value from that. And this is the reality. So basically see that in Italy most operators are with the consumer market is proving to be more and more challenging every day. What happens on the other hand, I think it's true the other way around. The other way around, meaning that content providers do need our network as well. And when I'm referring to content provider, I'm not referring to generally everybody that sends content over the internet. I think there's been a dramatic change over the past few years, basically, meaning that, I mean, there are more and more business model based on high quality video content, live streaming, that originally was only and mostly, I mean, delivered, let's say, via satellite or cable networks. In which case the content provider had no doubt and no problem in actually paying the operator that was providing the means of transmission, because they needed, since, I mean, we're talking about pay content, we're not talking about, this is not a free internet world we were discussing and we were relying on a few years ago. This is, I mean, a completely different, we're talking about completely different business model. So it is an ecosystem. We do need each other, but we need to look at the exact, I mean, at the correct economic dynamics to understand where we're really at. So what the original model also was perfectly working, where there was a good balance between the data sent, data received. I mean, it was a very, very different era. Now, I mean, we're talking about something that is kind of different. It's kind of different, and is simply replacing other means of transmission that we had before. So with the advent of this with the bandwidth intensive application, somehow the imbalance between us and the content provider has increased to a level that it's really starting to create problem. Why is this imbalance? Because again, there is we're talking about local companies, maybe small local companies, such as Fastweb, for instance. We are just in Italy, so we don't have a multinational presence, versus I mean, a big tech player that instead have a totally different size and totally different capability, and also the impossibility to negotiate sometimes ways in which to optimize the transmission. This is what was frustrating over the year, that in some situation we were just seeking negotiation to, for instance, I mean, leverage content delivery network, leverage other ways in which to optimize the delivery of content to our customer and reduce the kind of, I mean, work that we had to do on our network. And this wasn't even possible. Sometimes we just were finding a wall, talking to a wall, which objectively, I mean, was a problem. And therefore, I mean, this is why we feel that, I mean, we are honestly, we need, I mean, we are in need of some form of regulation to adjust this this imbalance, to rebalance in a way this situation, and because basically, I mean, I hear what Tom was saying, and I agree with some of the elements that he was putting on the table. But let's be very honest. Again, as I was saying, sometimes on the other side, we found very little investment in content delivery network that could do a lot to improve the situation. In other cases, there is the content provider opts for a multi content delivery network approach that also increases our costs because we need to go and interconnect in different areas. And nevertheless, I assure you that even the best content delivery network approach doesn't eliminate the need to upgrade our network, our transport network. And it is not any longer a marginal cost, honestly. I mean, we've noted that since from 2017 to today, the cost of our backhauling transport network has increased in a range of 15 times. So, I mean, we're not discussing something that is marginally longer. And on top of that, let's also be honest, the switch to more performing access network needs to be put into the equation. I mean, the development of fiber to the home is underway and has been at the very center of the European Commission policy over the past 10 years. I mean, it has been, I mean, all member states have been pushed to deliver fiber to the home. And so we are in the middle of, I mean, incredibly high investment, whether we are the operator actually deploying fiber or operator that is just buying access to a network, to a fiber to the home network has been deployed. It involves increased CapEx, increased OpEx, relevant increased CapEx, increased OpEx. And again, and we find ourselves squeezed between two ends. On one hand, the need to increase our investment, the other, as I mean, I was making the case for Italy, a situation in which there is no availability from the consumer side to pay an extra price. So this situation is, I mean, basically a recipe for disaster. In some country, this situation is not going to make this business viable and sustainable any longer. And we are, I mean, very much, I mean, probably Italy is going to be one of the countries in which this happens very, very quickly. And again, this is going to be really the end of innovation. This is going to be really the end of I mean, a model that has worked perfectly over the past years, because we, I mean, will not be able, because fiber, I assure you, is not the end of the innovation. It's not enough to put fiber and say, okay, we're fine, we're done for the next 100 years. That's not true. I mean, Faso was the first operator to deploy fiber 20 years ago, and still we had to put God knows how much more investment on top of the original fiber we put to actually switch to gigabit networks. And we know that at the pace we're going in data growth, I mean, we're going to have to foresee additional investment in 5-10 years time. So we need to make sure that this ecosystem is sustainable for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I think it was very important for our discussion when you share your experiences and also describe the situation in Italy. And you have used the expression that when we have imbalanced situation now, we need to rebalance it. Yes, I think it's very important direction of our thinking about the solution and trying to find the optimal model also for the future, as you have mentioned. And now, thank you very much. And now I want to move to Karl Gunberg, Director of Policy Development and Research at the Internet Society. So finally, we have the voice of civic society organization. Karl, the screen is yours, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much to organizers for putting on this session, which I think is very timely and has really good focus in looking at the impact on SMEs and consumers. Because I think, unfortunately, if you were to read the news reporting around this topic, I think that gets lost sometimes, that this is not just a debate between big tech companies like Google and Meta on the one hand, and the large telco operators on the other hand. This is really an issue that concerns all of us. And from our perspective, we think that these rules that have been proposed in the terminology of network fees would be inherently disastrous for the internet and be extremely negative for the digital environment in Europe. And this is really where our concern comes in. So I represent an organization that was founded by some of the internet's pioneers some 30 years ago. And our mission is inherently to promote and protect the internet globally. Both its technical infrastructure to make sure that it's a model of networking that can continue, but importantly also its users. And when I say users, I really mean all of the internet's users, whether it's consumers, whether it's SMEs, whether it's the large tech companies, or whether it's the large telecom operators. To us, they are all users of the internet, and we're trying to protect a sustainable internet going forward. And the problem with these rules that have been proposed in the terms of network fees is that they inherently goes against the very meaning of the internet and the essence of the networking model. And Tom made a really good presentation describing some of the kind of negative externalities that would come from these types of rules. But I wanted to give kind of a more conceptual description of the problems that we see by kind of illustrating this with a very basic scenario of what network usage fees would imply, and hopefully one that is relatable to the audience. So let's imagine that you are a Italian company that sells something over the internet where you have customers all over Europe or even all over the world. So in today, you could have customers visiting your site virtually from any country in the world. However, with network usage fees, you would now suddenly be asked to negotiate a separate contract with network operators in, for example, Denmark, for your Danish customers to be able to reach your website. So you have your website in Italy, but for anyone in Denmark to visit your site, you would need to first negotiate a contract with their network operator. So you would need to ask yourself if that is worth your money and your time. Then consider that, for instance, that there is not just one network operator in Denmark, there might be 20 network operators. So you need to ask yourself if you should set up a contract with each one of them or just a few of them. And you need to also take into consideration your future customers, for instance, which networks will they live in? But once you figured that one out, then you need to think about, okay, I've dealt with the Danish situation. Now you need to repeat the exact same exercise for all the other countries in Europe, and even with networks within Italy that you yourself has hosted. So you can see how this would end up, having to spend your days basically calculating which network operators that your customers use and negotiate contracts with those operators so that your customers can visit your site. And the point about this story is that the beautiful thing about the internet is that it allows us to skip all of these questions, because on the internet, all you need is connection to one network and you get access to all of the endpoints on the internet. You only need one contract, you only need one network to get access to all of the networks out there. But this would change with network fees, because effectively you would need to start answering these questions, because that's in essence what this is about. It's about a user's network operator being allowed to charge you for delivering data to their users. Data from you that those users have requested when they chose to visit your website, and data that they have already paid for in their internet access subscription. So this is the very fundamental reason from our perspective why this is so harmful to the internet, because it breaks this very fundamental characteristic of the internet of being one network. Now, I know in this debate, people would point out that, this is a bit exaggerated because we're not actually asking all the companies out there to pay these fees. We wouldn't target SMEs. It would only be the largest tech companies that would be obligated to do this. However, there are a few key issues even with that standpoint. The first one is that the whole premise for charging these large tech companies is that they, quote unquote, generate traffic. As Nina and Thomas pointed out, this is simply not true. This is us as users that are requesting this traffic when we're visiting these sites. And we have already paid for this traffic in our internet subscription. And in fact, large tech companies, they've also already paid for the ability to send it. They're paying for internet access on their end. The second reason is that if these fees are imposed, they would also be passed on to users, whether it's me as a user in terms of being a consumer, making use of an online service where I can expect a higher subscription fee to, for instance, a video streaming service because they are now being charged extra to send me that data. Or it might be you as a company where you host your content or your service in a cloud service, and that cloud service will inevitably start charging you more because they are being charged more to have your data being delivered to your customers. Again, data that those customers have already paid for in their internet subscription. And finally, this whole argument for charging these large tech companies that have been presented is based on the fact that they represent a lot of traffic. And the claim is that these relatively large traffic volumes from a few sources are costly for network operators. However, this is also not fully true, as Tom illustrated, that the real cost comes in the investments in the infrastructure where you're trying to upgrade the absolute capacity. So you're trying to invest to manage the peak traffic, as it's called. The relative traffic volumes doesn't really affect this. So if you were to build a policy on this very flawed assumption about relative traffic volumes, then you would also need to ask yourself why this obligation would not be expanded beyond the likes of Facebook, for instance. So for instance, if the same volume of traffic came from 100 SMEs, why would they not start charging each one of them 100th of what they're charging Facebook? It simply doesn't really hold water when you look at it from that perspective. And these are just a few of the reasons why network fees is such a bad idea. They don't really make any sense in terms of factually what is causing the traffic. They don't really benefit anyone except perhaps for a few large telecom operators, and they will harm the internet that we all rely on. So this is also why it's so important that SMEs and consumers make their voices heard on this topic, because it is not only large tech companies that these rules would affect, they would really affect all of us. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Carl. I think it was a very important added value to our discussion. You have touched the question of net neutrality, which is important, which is related to the values of the free internet. Also, you have mentioned that probably this model of fee could be against the rules of the single market, because if we would like to scaling up our services, our company, our small business to another country, and probably we will need to we will be obliged to prepare and to sign the new agreement and contract. Yes, it will be complication, not simplification of the rules of the functioning of the single market. And the last point is important: who is generating the traffic? Yes, our demands, ours as users. Yes, and we need to take into account, of course, when we are discussing about streaming, for example. I remember the debate some years ago when the problem of copyright was clear. Now it's much more ordered, because there are low-priced subscriptions for some movies, films, and so on, for music also, and it's sufficient. And it's bringing the benefits for users, for consumers, but on the other hand, it's not breaking the copyright rules. Yes, so I think it's very, very important. Now we have finished our panel, and looking at the debate, and thank you very much to all of you. I think that some motives and some arguments were very important, and I think that you could agree if I would ask Dr. Jakob Greiner for your reaction. Yes, because you as representative of telco business, not only Deutsche Telekom, as you have expressed. I agree. So what is your opinion about some voices which appeared during this discussion? Jakob, could I ask you for your comments?
Sure, I try to make it short. Thank you, Michael, and also for this interesting debate that we now had. I mean, first, I can only reiterate what Lisa said with regard to users are calling for the content. That's basically effectively paying twice, and telcos monetize this increase of traffic. I can just fully agree with Lisa. That's not the case. You know, if you think of what you are paying today for your contract and what you paid back then, and how much traffic or how much bandwidth was given back then and now, you will see that, of course, we go with the time and with the new requirements, but we're not charging more. You have flat rates that is now a given. That is surely a good thing. But again, I can only say, if we were to monetize those 20–30% of traffic increase each year, would be great, but we're not. As we said, end user prices are going down. And that's the expectation also of the European Union, to remain those affordable prices. And that brings me to this connotation that I hear all the time, that it's a given fact that the other side of this discussion will then raise its prices vis-a-vis SMEs and so on. I find it, to be honest with you, outrageous that it can be so easily said. If I were to say that as Deutsche Telekom with my fellow competitors, and I would say, yeah, well, you know, if nothing happens, we're going to raise our prices, I wonder what would happen. And for me, that shows that, number one, there seems to be a problem of competition then in this market. Or is there enough competition? Last time I knew, streaming market is quite competitive. I'm not sure they can raise their prices and then put it all on the SMEs, as is this point that is always made here. Let me just also come to net neutrality. You know, I see a lot these debates where the European Commission is standing there as the guardian of the treaty. And the Commission itself says they don't intellectually grasp the discussion. We have a TSM regulation in place. And Carl knows this, coming from the Internet Society. Where does the TSM regulation apply? It applies in the relationship between operators vis-a-vis end users. No throttling, no blocking, no discrimination. It does not apply in the relationship of large content, or in general, content application providers and us when we are commercially negotiating wholesale agreements. Now, you could argue, and I read this all the time, well, but then Deutsche Telekom or a smaller ISP, as we heard, it's not only about large telcos, or Lisa would then say, well, you know what? I'm going to give Meta or Netflix or whoever the fast lane, and the rest will go with the slow lane. And by that, in the end, you have a differentiation in quality. And by that, this will have consequences for the end user. Well, I have only one answer to you. If that's the case, we were already today breaching net neutrality, because these contracts exist and we receive payments for paid peering. And we're not treating, in the end, the traffic different from any other traffic that we, in the end, provide to the end user. So I don't fully understand it. And I have full trust, but maybe you can explain it to me, Carl. I have full trust that the European Commission will respect this principle of net neutrality for whatever comes out of this consultation process. By the way, if you read the net neutrality review that just has been published by the Commission last week, it spends a whole paragraph on exactly that matter, reiterating again that this debate has no consequence or will not endanger the principle of net neutrality. And I couldn't agree more. I am not intending to breach net neutrality as my company. What benefit do I have from it? And I have full trust that the European Commission respects this principle. And to say otherwise, I find difficult to understand, given that the European Commission, as the guardian of the treaty, is the one institution that needs to ensure that this principle continues to be respected. I leave it with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your explanation. And I think it's also very, very important, and it's opening the discussion about how we are using very often myths in our debates, yes, exaggerating some threats or minimizing some threats, but this is a discussion. So now I want to ask Tom Smith, because there were some questions addressed to you by Lisa, and after that I would like to ask Carl for your answer and comment addressed to Jakob. So Tom, please.
I agree with Lisa, and I'm thankful to her for her campaigning on the net neutrality issue years and years ago. One of the key things that I was saying throughout is that the business models need to be sustainable, and there, you've competition in the internet access market. And what I meant by that is that if you have bigger companies doing below cost selling or promotional pricing and all this type of stuff with all these gimmicks, and half subsidized by some network fee structure, I think that would be detrimental further. It will do further damage to the competitiveness for SMEs. In fairness, a lot of the costs I was talking about, to be fair, was when you own your own infrastructure and you own your own devices and you own your own backhaul, you've already bought your own backhaul. If you are leasing backhaul from competitors or wholesale providers in country, that can be quite an expensive undertaking, to be fair. And we've seen it. And I would say that within our own network, when we lease from another network, that cost can be quite expensive. So like in the Irish example, I would say after Labour, I would say leasing infrastructure from other ISPs in country can be an expensive component of our cost base. What I was trying to say is that have the user, if there is a need for the digital divide, get the consumer to pay transparently to the internet provider to provide them internet access to whatever content they choose, and not have kind of big daddy commission coming in taxing some way and then giving it to selective operators, like, because state aid is typically selective. Like in the Irish example, so notwithstanding that we have about 50 companies in Ireland, the government chose to do a large intervention, which was a single operator. And so you don't have, you've competition at the retail level, but not at the infrastructure level per se. So you kind of replace these 50 operators with, a large scale intervention. It's more efficient, or it can be more efficient, and that's one of the arguments for those. So I just wanted to circle back, but just, I do think that if people have very low subscription prices in that market, I think that makes the model unsustainable. And realistically, the regulators need to look at why are the access prices being depressed, and why is, let's say, the wholesale prices on the back end squeezing the retail or the smaller operator. And so but it's a separate issue. I think the network fees would only just add petrol to that fire, and that's the issue I'd have there. Thank you, and thanks Lisa for her comments. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And Carl, could you present your opinion and your view focused on this debate on net neutrality? Carl, please.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm still baffled how people can say that this would not impact net neutrality. It very clearly does. If the obligation is for unaccessed IPs to treat all traffic equally, and now they have the opportunity to request a mandated payment from a content provider, I would assume that the sanctions against not paying that network fee would be a degradation of quality or blocking that service, and that would be in direct violation of net neutrality. So to say that this has no bearing on net neutrality just doesn't make any sense. And also to address Jacob's point, I think when we're talking about these issues, there are different models for how this payment would happen. So one of the scenarios which we saw in South Korea was that they were starting to mandate what is known as paid peering. basically that the networks were not allowed to negotiate freely what the relationship should be, but that in this case, a content provider had to pay the access network in order to be interconnected. The result there was that those interconnections stopped happening in South Korea. They moved abroad. And that is very likely to happen in such a scenario in Europe as well, that if you are to mandate paid peering, those services will simply choose to interconnect outside of Europe. They'll go to UK, they'll go to Middle East or something like that. That's exactly what we've seen happening in South Korea, where interconnections have moved from South Korea to Japan. And the remedy in South Korea now to deal with that is basically to introduce what they call network usage fees, what has been proposed here in Europe, which is basically a fee that is agnostic to your interconnection relationship. It doesn't matter if you have an direct interconnection with Facebook, it's carrying the traffic from Facebook that will be charged. So it doesn't have to do anything with the interconnection market in that scenario of network usage fees. And those are clearly issues that are in conflict with net neutrality, where all traffic is to be treated equally.
Thank you very much. We have some last minutes. If somebody wants to comment the debate or somebody's
Thanks, Michael. I'd like to quickly jump in, and I appreciate that we could continue for hours on this, and I'm sure we will continue to debate it. I just wanted to react to some of the earlier points that were made through the submissions, which were really about metaverse, for example. And Jakob, thank you for flagging sort of that one sentence from Analysis Mason in a 40 or 50 page document, which, as you're right, is incorrectly being quoted in the market, which is again why we published a much more detailed 4 to 5 page engineering blog from our own folks who actually are building the metaverse and understand about this. In terms of future needs, yes, it is very difficult to anticipate what those would be in 20 to 30 years. And interestingly, Germany is the one laggard in Europe that is still on copper rather than fiber. So perhaps, moving to that more quickly will also help to bring down upgrade costs as we go forward. In terms of pricing, there is significant pressure, and I really do sympathise with the telcos' positions here, that they are offering these fixed price bundles, often bundling them with content as well. But I think if it is a retail pricing issue, then that should be debated rather than looking for subsidies from one part of the industry, and perhaps profits that are being made, and there have been record profits from most of the incumbent telcos announced this year in Europe. They're not used to then buy up US businesses, but actually reinvested in European infrastructure. On peering, I think we've heard a lot about this, and I won't go into the net neutrality, but just to flag, as Jakob knows, Deutsche Telekom is very much the outlier here, charging for peering in the market. Over 99% of the global peering arrangements are settlement free, and this comes from BEREC, but also from WIC and from the German regulator Bundesnetzagentur itself. And Lisa made this really good point about optimization and also about environmental issues. And I can't speak for peer companies, but I can certainly say at Meta, we do take proactive measures to make sure that we have video compression, which is 30% more efficient than the H.264 standard in the market. And we've been investing billions in AI, which is also looking at audio compression and is 10% more efficient than the current audio transmission, but also with no less of quality. And we're doing that with telco partners. We're doing that in Paris. We cited a research center here in Europe. So those were just my initial observations. Thank you again for your time, and I'm sure we will continue to debate, Micha.
Thank you very much for all your suggestions. I think that we can continue this debate through many hours, but unfortunately we need to finish. I want to quote the conclusion presented by Horst Heitz: what can make infrastructure investments cheaper, easier? And I think what is important in his conclusion is, in this sense, the first priority must be to reduce unnecessary costs and at the same time create transparency about the cost for society. It is absolutely clear that the companies, telecom or big tech, want to make a profit. This motivation must be used to solve problems in the market and not as a problem. I see this approach as insufficient in many EU regulations and here too, for me, unleashing the market does not mean fees introduced by the state, but prices in line with the market in competition with companies. Thank you, host, for your conclusion. I want to thanks to all of you for this very hot and very important and very deep debate. Some thoughts, some ideas at the end of this meeting. We do need each other, what was said by Lisa. We need realistic impact assessment, what was said by Tom Smith. We need to consider who generate traffic, which was raised by Nina, which was raised also by Carl and also Tom. When we are discussing about digital transformation, we need to understand that it requires network transformation. Jacob raised it and emphasized very, very strongly. Some of us emphasized how important it is to discuss and to lead the discussion based on facts. So there were many reports, analyses presented as references points during our discussion. And of course, what was said by Ivan Stefanec at the beginning, we need stable SMEs environment for SMEs. Yeah? So the discussion should be continued, and I think that it was only the small step during our meeting, during our debate, but I think that it is very important to consider how we can participate in this consultation organized by the European Commission and fulfill the questionnaire, because I think it is very important to participate in this kind of discussions. Ivan, do you want to summarize the debate? Because what is the most important, this is the opportunity that we have Ivan, and if I can say, I'm very sorry, he is some kind of transmission to the European Parliament, and finally all of those issues will be discussed by in the European Parliament. Ivan, please.
I think Ivan is no longer in the call.
Okay, so I will.
Michael, just to say,
Michael, yes,
if
Michael,
you want
please.
to contribute to the consultation, the time is ticking. It's 9 days left.
Taxpayer point, please, Michel. So this is also so. I'm sorry. This is 11:42, so we can finish the debate. Thank you very much to all of you for the very fruitful and very deep debate, and I hope that we will continue in many areas, in many institutions, using many occasions and possibilities, opportunities to discuss those issues, because it's important when we are starting the real debate on the future of the internet, future of network. Yes, some issues really requires changes, but of course we need to be very cautious and consider very practically the type and model of this fee, if the Commission will be open and ready to implement this. But all aspects indicated by you during this discussion should be taken into consideration. Thank you very much, and let's meet at the meeting organized by SME Connect the next time. Thank you.